Okay, so we recently talked about the preservation of the Sindhi language in Pakistan, and we found out that they're doing a pretty good job. We went into a lot of detail, and if you want to know more, you can always head on over to the link here and in the description box to find that video. But that got me thinking about what is going on with Sindhi in India. And the more I researched, the more fascinating that story became. Because a lot of experts actually talk about how the Sindhi language has a very bleak future in India. But at the same time, if you look at the numbers, they paint a completely different picture. So what exactly is going on? I mean, what to believe, right? Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarikhi Tales. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. If you want to help support this channel, you can become a member on Patreon, which is linked down below and here. You can also become a paid member of this YouTube channel and that will help support the channel. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you thinking Sindhis in India, well, now the Sindhi people and the Sindhi language originated from this area, which is the province of Sindh. It is today located in Pakistan. But in the year 1947, when partition took place and India and Pakistan were born, more than 800,000 people migrated from Pakistan to the Indian side. And among those people also came a large population of Sindhi Hindus. Today, more than 2.7 million people in India speak Sindhi. And luckily for our topic today, there have been quite a number of interesting studies that have happened on the Sindhi community and their language and the preservation and everything in India. So what exactly did I mean in the beginning of the video when I said that a lot of scholars and academics paint a very bleak picture of the Sindhi language in India? So looking at all the different studies, I've kind of condensed what they're talking about, and we see that a lot of the studies talk about the decline or the decay of the Sindhi language in three major domains. Number one is structural purity. This is to do with how much the Sindhi language is actually changing after partition, how much it's losing the essence of that original Sindhi language. Secondly, the function in society. In terms of function, we see that in India, the Sindhi language doesn't really have a lot of functional roles. It's almost never used in any kind of administrative or official business. It's also not generally preferred as a medium of education. And the only domain we see this language mostly in is the community domain, and it's mostly just verbal communication that's going on in Sindhi. And the third thing is conspicuousness in everyday life. And that basically means how much it stands out, how distinct it is from all the other languages. And recent studies have found that Sindhi has actually tried very, very hard to kind of blend into all the other languages that are found in India. We'll go into more detail about that in a bit. And this again ties into the earlier point about structural purity, because it's losing that original Sindhi essence and then kind of assimilating with other Indian languages. So that's what most academics are basically talking about when they say that the Sindhi language is on the decline or decaying in India. But here is a twist. Have a look at this. This is the Indian census on the number of Sindhi speakers starting all the way from 1951. And what we see is a steady increase in the number of self-proclaimed Sindhi mother tongue speakers. The last census in India was done in 2011, and up till then, we see a very, very steady increase in the Sindhi speaking population. And looking at these numbers, that's where the fascinating aspect comes in, that how can academics point out that the language is decaying when the number of speakers are actually increasing? Because there is a proper term for this. The term is language shift. Now, linguists talk about a language shift when somebody shifts away from their own language and moves to another or a more dominant language. And the loose definition of this term kind of talks about three main criteria that need to be fulfilled before we can say that, yes, the people of this language are shifting away from it. And those criteria are domain of use, speaker base, and ethno-linguistic affiliation. And it's because of this definition that we see that we can't really say that a language shift is happening in the case of Indian Sindhis, because the speaker base is actually increasing. Another thing some scholars point out is that, okay, it's possible that the number of people who are speaking Sindhi or self-proclaimed Sindhi speakers are increasing. But it is possible that these newer people, newer generations who are speaking Sindhi are not as fluent. They might not have the hold on the language that their elders must have had. But there are other scholars that point out that this is a good thing, because that means that the ethno-linguistic affiliation aspect that we talked about is tightly in place, meaning that People aren't ashamed of being associated with the Sindhi label, the younger generations especially, because that's one of the reasons in other cases where a language shift occurs. So it's definitely a positive attribute that even if people aren't as fluent in Sindhi, they still are identifying as Sindhis. So seeing all this increase in number and this positivity, you have to wonder, what were those scholars talking about earlier? About the decay and the decline, right? So let me break it down for you. I told you I'd go into detail, and that's what I'm going to do now. Those scholars were not exactly wrong, because there are things within the Sindhi language that are changing and quite rapidly. The first among these changes is the sound system, the phonology of the language. The phonology of the Sindhi language has actually been a subject of study since the mid-19th century. That's even before this modern studying genre of linguistics was even established. So the thing with the Sindhi language is that it has a couple of unique sounds and attributes that are found in only some of the languages. But there's always been debate among academics about which sounds and which phonetics actually belong in the Sindhi language and which don't. And this debate has kind of increased after the partition, because then we see like a divergence occurring between the Pakistani Sindhi and the Sindhi then found in India today. Now, among the sound system, the first transformation that we find involves 4 consonants: kh, r, z, and f. Now, linguists say that these sounds emerge in the Sindhi language because of the Persian and Arabic influence that has been on the language since a very, very long time now. And some scholars say that these sounds were not always embedded into Sindhi, but in the mid-20th century, when Sindhi was kind of standardized for education, these sounds actually became an official part of the Sindhi language and were taught accordingly. And at that time, if somebody was to pronounce these consonants as instead of kh, k, instead of r, g, instead of z, j, and instead of f, p, then that was kind of looked down upon. However, when partition takes place, we start to see a pattern of a sound loss occurring in the language, especially in the case of the sounds kh and r. Now, just to give you guys an example, of course, I don't speak Sindhi. I'm not a Sindhi and I don't speak Sindhi, so I can't give you Sindhi examples. But because Urdu also has a lot of Arabic and Persian influence, the sounds kh are also found in Urdu, but in Hindi, you don't find that sound. So words like khairat would be khairat, or ghairat would be gerat. So you can hear the difference in the sound. So this change also resulted in some of the words in Sindhi which had a different sound initially and a different meaning being pronounced in a similar manner, and thus the same word having 2 meanings now. For example, the Sindhi word sakhi would mean a female friend, and another word, sakhi, would mean generous. But with the loss of the kh sound in Indian Sindhi, both of these words are known now as sakhi. So it can either be a female friend or it can be generous. The other consonants, the z and f sounds, those seem to be quite well established in Indian Sindhi and they're doing perfectly fine. Now, the other change that came about in structural purity within the sound system is the loss of implosives. Now, implosives are the kind of sounds where you kind of suck air into your lungs and then you speak the word. These are the consonants regarding the implosives that scholars talk about, which are now changing. And now, because I don't know how to pronounce those, but I did find a really nice resource for you guys to understand what implosives are, is a website. It's called learnsindhila.edu.pk, and I'll put a link down in the description where you can actually go and hear all of these consonants, and you can explore the website and learn the Pakistani pronunciation of the Sindhi language, which now differs from the Indian one. And it's these implosives that are also kind of now lost in the Indian Sindhi language. And researchers found that this change, the loss of implosives, basically came about from the younger generations because they had a hard time learning how to make these sounds. And these sounds were also unique from all the other languages that they were surrounded by. In the case of Sindhi in Pakistan, another language, Saraiki, which is located in southern Punjab, also has these implosives. So they see some similarities between other languages nearby there, but not in the Indian case. Now, another thing that was kind of lost within this entire process is vowel finality. Now, historically, some words in the Sindhi language tend to end with the vowels A, I, or U, and especially the words which are borrowed from a foreign language. But after partition, the Sindhis in India basically started to lose this characteristic of the Sindhi language as well. And researchers say that it's because a lot of the Indo-Aryan languages do not have this feature of vowel finality. And now because these people, this Sindhi diaspora, was away from its native land and its larger community, they found it harder to kind of keep this aspect of the language with them. So one of the research papers that I went through talks about this. The author Khubchandani actually talks about how initially losing the vowel finality is kind of only attributed to Hindi words or words from other languages that are taken into Sindhi. They do use vowel finality for the Sindhi language words. But 50 years after that study, another study took place, and the researcher Lachman actually confirms that 50 years later, the Sindhi words which ended with vowel finality have kind of also lost their essence and are now being ended without vowels. Now, another feature related to vowels that changed within the Indian Sindhi context is the nasalization of names or words ending in a vowel. For example, Khubchandani notes that Sindhi names for women like Leela or Meera, you hear that nasalization at the end, that those names are distinctively Sindhi sounding. But researchers after this time period found that nasalization of the ending vowel kind of ends in a lot of the Sindhi names, with the similar names becoming Leela or Meera, which is more closer to their Hindi counterparts. Now, other changes that have occurred, I'm not going to go into detail about all of them. You can find more details down in the sources that I've listed in my description box. There are also changes in the grammatical structure of Sindhi. We also see an internalization of loan words, and we also see that the meaning of some of the words also begins to change from what it used to be in Sindhi. A very good example of this is that there is a Sindhi English dictionary which has now become kind of like a classic. It talks about the Sindhi word vandu, meaning quarrel or uproar. Now, roughly 50 years after that dictionary came out, Khubchandani writes down the meaning of the same word vandu as concern. And 50 years after that, another dictionary, now this time a Gujarati to English learners dictionary, writes the Gujarati word vandu as meaning opposition or objection. And recent researchers have found that in the Sindhi Indian community, that same word vandu is kind of linked with the meaning objection or opposition, which is similar to the meaning that is found in Gujarati language. So we see that some of the words are also changing in terms of what they mean. Now, one more issue that we have in the case of Sindhi is the multiscriptural history of Sindhi. Now, Sindhi is among one of those languages that are written in multiple scripts, and it's always been that way. It hasn't stuck to one script. But in 1853, we find that the British government of Sindh actually makes the Arabic Persian script as the official script for the Sindhi language. But there was some work being done in the Devanagari script at that time as well, and some other scripts were also in use. But it was only after partition that the Persian Arabic script became much more established in the Pakistani side of Sindh. But in the Indian side, among Sindhi speakers, we see that there became like three different opinions. Some people preferred Perso-Arabic script, some people preferred the Devanagari script, but there were others who really didn't care what script was used. Eventually, there was also some support for writing the Sindhi language in like a Roman script so that everybody can access it easily. But this issue is still not close to being resolved. Now, these were all the issues that the academics and scholars were talking about when they talked about the decay or the decline of the Sindhi language in India. But as we noticed, the numbers in terms of Sindhi speakers is kind of increasing in India. Obviously, it's with the population increase, but when there's a language shift, we see that even though the population increases, the number of speakers starts to decrease. But in the case of Sindhi, it's a positive indicator that the number of speakers are also increasing. And some recent researchers try to talk about why this phenomena is occurring. And these researchers talk about looking at Sindhi in India from a language ecology perspective. This idea was pioneered by a linguist called Iyengar, and Hagen defines language ecology as the study of interactions between any given language and its environment. The true environment of a language is a society that uses it as one of its codes. Now, using this ideology, researchers say that a language is basically like an organism and it's always evolving and growing according to the changes in its environment. And there are always reasons for these changes. For example, the very first thing we talked about in terms of change was the loss of the kh and the g sounds in favor of the k and the g sounds. Now, a lot of researchers point out that this could be a mindful shift from the more Muslim pronunciation because of the Arabic Persian touch, kh and g, to the more closely Hindu-affiliated pronunciation like k and g. And it may precisely be these small adaptations that the Sindhi language has kind of undertaken, which allowed it to kind of grow in India rather than decrease. Now, this situation kind of falls very beautifully on Ajit Mohanty's definition of a language of a minority language kind of growing by showing anti-predatory behaviors in terms of its sociolinguistic demeanor. Now, according to Mohanty's definition, Sindhi in India has retreated to areas of lesser access and visibility and lower resources, and restricted to domains of home and in-group communication and other less significant domains. In other words, the Sindhi language has only been able to survive and grow in India at the cost of its social visibility and at the cost of some structure of the Sindhi language being altered to better adapt and assimilate into the languages around its environment. So this can't really be just viewed as like a decay or a decline of the Sindhi language, because all of the factors that we've talked about and all of the changes that have happened in the language have allowed the Sindhi language to kind of continue growing and continue being part of the identity of even the younger generations. So there you go. That's why I said that the case of Sindhi in India is quite interesting, because it's a little bit confusing when you start to read about it in the beginning. You're like, is it declining or is it not? What's going on? So let me know down below, what do you guys think of this video, and I will see you guys next time.